Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule, not only to attend this session, but also to do the pilot in general. The L&D team really appreciates you and appreciate the feedback we've gotten so far. We've already been able to make so many updates for future iterations of this program, so we really appreciate you. And welcome to the week 3 live learning session for the Manager Challenge pilot. We will be talking about building an inclusive and belonging environment. So the learning objectives for today, we will recognize the role of psychological safety in building an inclusive environment, evaluate and learn how managers at GitLab build an inclusive environment on the teams they lead, and also acquire skills to lead multicultural teams in a global remote setting. So just to give you all a reminder of what we've done this week, and if you're behind on challenges, that's okay, we still want you here. But just an overview of what the week's topics have been. Monday, or day 11, was about psychological safety. Day 12 was on understanding different cultures on your team. So you likely did the Hofstede country comparison tool to see what that looks like. Yesterday, or day 13, was building an inclusive culture, and we had a backpack challenge. Today is the live learning session, and tomorrow is the self-reflection and evaluation. You can also use it as a catch-up day. I will get that issue live right after this call ends, so that if you want to give us some feedback, you can do that while it's fresh in your mind. And if you can, definitely go back and look at some of the issues for this week and even prior weeks, and look at some of the other issue comments. There's really a lot of great content and comments from your peers in there, and we're going to try to figure out a way to summarize them, but if you can go back and take a look at them, that'd be really awesome and beneficial. Definitely worth your time. So we're going to kick off with a breakout activity again this week. It will be 9 minutes long. We want to make sure you all have time to get to know each other a little bit in your groups. Another thing is, if you can try to figure out what group number you're in, it's somewhere on the Zoom, like your Zoom thing, it'll say group, whatever number you're in. I will call on you by group number when you come back. So first in your group, introduce yourselves, get to know each other a little bit, and then discuss, when you hear the phrase psychological safety, how does that make you feel? And also, if you have one, share a personal or professional example of when you did not feel psychologically safe and how that felt for you and what you did to address it. So with that, I think Josh will put you all into breakout rooms.
Sweet. We will see you all soon.
Welcome back. I think everyone's back. Looks like it. Awesome. I hope that was long enough for you all to get to know each other a little bit and have a good discussion. We're just going to run through some of these and have the group share. We only had 2 groups, and we're going to mix it up and start with group 2 first to share what y'all discussed. So if someone from group 2 would want to share, that'd be awesome.
And that's Beverly, Craig, and Justin.
I think we were all silently waiting for the other person to step up and talk.
Yeah,
so
pretty much. Sorry.
All right, I was talking, and so what I said was feeling like you can be your authentic self, within professional standards, obviously, and feeling like you can speak your mind and have that outlet to where you're not going to feel any retaliation about what you say, what you feel. And Beverly brought up a really good point about creating an environment that's safe to fail in too. I think were the highlights that I remember from the conversation.
Definitely. Awesome. Did anyone have an example of when they have experienced not having psychological safety?
We didn't actually talk about that. We kind of took it a different route. We talked about what we would do to try to ensure psychological safety, or have done within our teams. And I talked about, being direct and honest with my team and literally using the term psychological safety and letting them know I want to build that environment for them. And that if they don't feel comfortable speaking to me, that I've talked to my boss, John. I said, listen, I've directed every one of them. If they don't feel comfortable speaking to me about something, they should come to you. And if they don't feel comfortable with either of those channels, go to people ops. So make sure that they know that there are a variety of opportunities where they can feel safe to talk to someone within the company, because we want to make sure that environment's available to them.
Awesome. That's great. I love that you've given them multiple options on where they can go. That's really helpful. Awesome. Cool. Would group one want to share anything about what y'all talked about?
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of responding to the phrase psychological safety, Lindsay had a really good point. It feels very clinical. So the response of just hearing that term, you kind of have to think about it, let it sink in. If we move past that, I think some of the phrases we had were being able to say what's on your mind without being judged, allowing to share opinions, and then allowed and even encouraged to make mistakes. So you feel like you're in a safe environment to do that. In terms of an example, I actually struggled to think about an example, which was really weird, but I threw my tech hat on, thinking back to being part of a development team that's, writing code, approaching product requirements and trying to implement something. But all the while, I've been in environments and I've had team members that have been very innovative. They've wanted to experiment with new technologies, new libraries, new coding patterns, things like that, where there's been pieces already put in place, like the project timeline requirements, also technology. I know I was in a company where a lot of our projects were very legacy, very maintenance driven. And so it was also hard. There was like just the mentality of, no, we just have to do it the old way, because that's how we are efficient as a company, is doing it the old way. And so the fear there and that lack of feeling safe is even though somebody could go off and spend their own time experimenting. If the PM or whatever got wind of that, they might get the exclamation like, you wasted time. I would have rather you put that toward the main project. Why are you doing this? And obviously that's just an unsafe territory to be in.
Yeah, awesome. Great example. Thanks for sharing that. And
Sure.
yeah, I think if you've ever experienced a situation where you haven't felt, or you felt psychologically unsafe, I think it makes you realize how important it is to have that for your team, because it can be a really rocky road for people to be walking down not feeling safe. So yeah, I appreciate you all discussing psychological safety. So we'll jump into a little bit of content about psychological safety. I won't dive too deep because there was some content this week and y'all just discussed it, but just to kind of brush the top quickly. So just the definition by Amy Edmondson is a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Not necessarily being warm and fuzzy, but mainly being able to share mistakes and missteps and how you learn from them. And I hope that y'all can see how this has kind of been building on each other. So week one was about getting to know your team. Part of week two was about having trust with your team. And then now week three is about psychological safety. And all those are really interlinked. And I think they're all really big pieces of what's coming next week in building high performance teams. You really need to have this strong foundation to be able to have a high performance team. And that relates to the positive impacts that psychological safety has. So when you do have this on your team, you'll see increased collaboration, innovation, inclusion, well-being, and culture. So people are more willing to collaborate with each other. They're coming up with more ideas because they aren't feeling like they're going to be shut down or reprimanded if they do something and it doesn't turn out well. They feel included. They feel personally they're well. And then you just have improved culture all around on your team. And I think with all these things increased on your team, you're probably going to see really high increase in results on your team as well. So just some positive impacts of psychological safety. And then how you can cultivate this culture of psychological safety on your team. This is on the psychological safety handbook page. So if you need to reference it again, you can. But first of all, embrace a culture of respectful debate. It's okay to disagree on things. We shouldn't just be proposing something and everyone just agrees to agree. Like, people should be comfortable saying differing opinions. Encourage personal storytelling. I think this links back to week 1 and just getting to know your team on a more personal level. Ask questions, so kind of relates back to week 1 as well as week 2 with coaching. 4, allow for experimentation and failure. I think this is really huge in psychological safety. Dismantle perceptions of hierarchy, so people don't have to have a certain title to be speaking up and saying things. Model an openness to feedback, not only delivering feedback to your team members, but also receiving it from your team members as well. Set clear goals and key performance indicators. People need to know what they're working towards. It can really help set a much more clear pathway for them. Offer development opportunities. People want to be able to stretch and grow in their careers, so offering them these opportunities. Build a speak up culture. If you watch the video on the psych safety page, Susan David talks in the video about hospitals that have higher error rates reported are actually the more safe hospitals to go to, because you know, if you're like having a procedure or something and like the dosage is wrong, someone will speak up and say something versus just letting it happen. So I think that is really interesting, and it's kind of the opposite of what you think. And then also making sure people can speak up regardless of whatever their diversity dimension is. And also highlighting competencies, so what people should be competent in, where they sit on the scale, things like that. So we are going to do another activity, but we're going to stay in this, well, it's larger, but small-ish size group, and kind of talk through some of these questions. We'll have about 10 minutes. So the first question, if anyone is comfortable sharing, would you be comfortable sharing experience working with other cultures where you may have misunderstood a behavior or communication?
I will. I worked in my last role extensively with teams in India, and I found that my initial response to the way a lot of the leaders of those teams spoke to me, it really did feel like I wasn't being respected. You know, they just didn't feel initially like I was being listened to, or that that necessarily that they were following my instruction and they were in a position where they were reporting to me or taking training from me around things like Scrum rollouts and such. And I learned over time that a lot of that just had to do with my interpretation of a lot of silence. And some of that was alleviated over time with just becoming more comfortable. But a lot of it was me having to change the way I spoke with people and asking a lot more direct questions, and not necessarily expecting people to be comfortable enough to really speak up and maybe speak out when they didn't understand something or suggest an alternative. And I do think it was a very cultural thing. And I think it was intensified by the fact that I was a woman.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. And kudos to you for changing your communication to help the situation. I think that's great. Does anyone else have an example for this question? Okay, we can go to the next one.
I was going to give an example, but
oh yeah, go ahead. Do please.
I'm a facilitator. I was thinking back to when I got my MBA, and you know, I went to a very global school in California, and it was a lot of like, you know, ethnicities and nationalities. And I remember just my first semester being in groups with a lot of you know, students from China and Japan, and you know, I think I had interpreted like maybe they're a little bit more introspection and maybe a little bit more less kind of extroverted nature, as opposed to myself as maybe something I was doing wrong because they didn't like reciprocate with me. And I just think, you know, from a cultural standpoint, you know, Americans, we can be a very like a little more gregarious and outspoken, and you know, maybe working with other cultures you know, in Asia or otherwhere, they can be a little bit more reserved and whatnot. So adapting my communication style that way.
Great example. Thanks for sharing.
Cool.
Awesome. So we'll move on to number 2. As a people leader, what steps can you take when someone joins your team from a country or culture other than your own? So the question is what steps can you take? But if you have done this before, what steps have you taken?
Whenever possible, go there. I know this is not a reality in our current environment, but it's really helped me a lot every occasion where I've actually got to go to whatever that country or that place is to understand what you can't understand remotely.
Definitely, totally. Just getting immersed in the culture is helpful.
I think, as always, I try to be direct, and I ask, you know, communication style preferences, praise preferences, coaching preferences, you know, just understand what they want to know. And a lot of times during that conversation, you can determine whether they've had this type of training as well, where they are cognizant of the differences between different cultures. And especially if you're in a big company like this, there's probably been some exposure to different cultures and at least trying to bridge those gaps. Whereas other more traditional companies, you may not have that. So for me, it always just helps to ask the questions. What do they like? How do they prefer to communicate? What doesn't work for them is as important of a question to ask as well. And even offering training such as this, you know, if you see that they're struggling to communicate with other cultures, say, you know, you probably do well to read this book or take this training and watch these videos that are available.
Definitely. I love that you're asking the questions, because I think like tools like the Hofstede country comparison tool are helpful to see like general trends, but obviously there are always going to be variations within different countries and cultures. So asking people like how they want to be communicated with, feedback, different things like that is really important. Awesome. And then any examples of how you can welcome and bridge multicultural backgrounds on your team, or even like celebrate multicultural backgrounds on your team?
So we've had an initiative where we kind of visited everyone's home country. I think I have shared this with some of you potentially. So we visited every single team member's home country, and what we did was everyone went and picked a location in the country that they would love to visit, and then the team member then sort of ran through all of the photos and shared some experiences. But one of the most awesome sessions like that we've had is one of the Total Rewards team members joined our call, Nitin, and he had actually created this full journey for us. He picked us up at the airport and took us on the train. He took us to his hometown. He took us to visit his home. He had pictures of his family. He showed us where he played under the mango trees when he was growing up. And he spoke about lessons his grandfather had taught him that were really important to him. And it just was like such a massive moment for me in terms of realizing, it just gave me like completely different perspective on things. And it was just a great way to be introduced into his culture and what's important to him. And yeah, it was just that the storytelling elements are so important, and it was great to have that.
I love that so much. That's so cool. And like, I personally just love getting to know other people on my team in that way. So that's really cool. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else have anything they want to share, or we can move on?
I just want to say, Beverly, that's awesome. I love that you guys did that. We did a much more lightweight version within our group where we did sort of a crib style home tour. So whoever volunteered did a little tour of their house, but I like expanding it and having it be the storytelling piece of it, less of sort of just a walkthrough. That was really great.
Yeah,
We've
we did
actually
the home
got
tour
an
too.
icebreaker in, sorry, Craig.
No.
We've got an icebreaker at the beginning of our bigger meeting that we have, so with the ops team and the experience team. And some of those, because everyone has a turn to pick one, have been like, what's an important item on your desk that you want to show the team, or what's a photograph from a moment that meant something to you. So I know it's very difficult to find time for these things, so we kind of put an extra 15 minutes onto the call and just made it happen that way too.
Yeah, I might have to steal that idea from you, Beverly. That's a good one. The other thing that I've seen work well with the team is like asking about holidays, because both of my teams are pretty well distributed, and people go on holidays on different days, and asking, what's the holiday for? What did you do? You know, is there anything you can share? And asking about big events that are happening in other parts of the world. Like Lindsay and I were in Smoke Central for a little while, and I was touched that every one of my team members asked me every day, is the air better for you? Are you safe? Are you doing okay? So just asking about big events and things that are going on in people's lives, I think helps quite a bit.
Awesome.
Beverly, I'm curious, do you know what Natan used to walk everybody through? Is it like Google Earth?
So he sort of done like a slide deck with all the different photographs, and then he just moved, but he had obviously put them in sequence, and they were all his personal photographs that he had taken. So it was really cool, and just the sense of pride in his heritage. And their sugarcane apparently is a big deal. Was pretty cool to see. I was actually just typing a message to the group. It's Heritage Day in South Africa today, so I expect you all to come back to me with a word, an Afrikaans word that you've learned.
Great, that's a great point too, Craig.
Thanks everyone for sharing. So we'll just talk a little bit more about cultures. This is outlined on the cross-cultural collaboration guide in the handbook, but just a few different ways that cultures can be different. I know the Hofstede tool also uses some metrics like power distance, uncertainty, avoidance, things like that, and those kind of can fall into these categories. But you have communication, so like high and low context communication are some big communication differences, leadership styles, how people want to give and receive feedback, how people collaborate, and then also concept of time. But again, important to note that it's, can vary based on like country, but also region, or just like how people grew up too. So just some practices for cultural awareness, again, in the handbook if you need to reference this. Staying values focused, assuming positive intent. I think this is a really big one because like I personally would not say something intentionally hurtful to someone in their culture. So I would hope that someone would know that I had positive intent and also be willing to say, hey, in my culture, that means this, and it's not a good thing. So assuming positive intent, asking questions, being humble, and setting expectations, and kind of like tied in with setting expectations, I think you should assume positive intent, but you should set the expectation with your team to assume positive intent with each other, so that the whole team is feeling comfortable letting others know when something may be different in their culture. So we're going to go to inclusive team culture now, and we'll have another 5-minute breakout activity. You'll be in the same groups as you were before. So yesterday was the backpack activity. So as you're going to your group, just kind of be reflecting on that. And then in your group, just discuss what did you learn by completing the backpack exercise? And then how can this make you more inclusive as a manager? And you'll be assigned to your groups. Welcome back. I think everyone's back. Awesome. So I hope you had some great discussions. I'm clicking things. Group 1, would you be willing to share what you discussed?
Sure. It was just Neil and I this time because we lost our third team member, and we talked, pretty honestly about how this this quiz or the assessment made us feel. I think we focused a little bit more on sort of the socioeconomic piece of it, and some of those questions that were a little bit more surprising to us, like the, you know, the fact that we were able to have enough books and things when we were young. So we started to talk about that a little bit, and then trying to take this through the eyes of somebody else. And, you know, I think Neil had some really good observations about, you know, younger people and like sort of someone who's, you know, at a younger age who's maybe struggling with some of the socioeconomic stuff we were talking about. And then we got into a conversation about an employee in India and how, you know, recent with coronavirus can change the way you feel about some of the responses on these types of questions. Neil, did I miss anything?
No, that was fantastic. I'll add to the India thing is what was very surprising to me is I don't feel my life has been greatly impacted. I feel very fortunate that we have a stable job, working from home. But yeah, when I'm thinking about this team member, they moved out of their home base in New Delhi to move back in with their parents, just so they had a more comfortable area to reside in while there was so much crazy stuff happening in that country. So things like that I wouldn't even consider. And the internet speed, things like that he's struggling with on a daily basis. Again, so it's nice to have a counterpart that I can talk to about this. And I think this exercise, and especially the country comparison, has enlightened me that there's much more that I need to understand.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's a really, really great example. And yeah, I think just right now with like lots of things going on everywhere, it's been pretty wild. Like, even if I know I've talked to people on the recruiting team that have interviewed people that are like staying in a shelter currently because their home burned down in the fires, and just like being mindful of those types of things. Group 2, do you have anything you want to add?
I don't know if I want to put Craig in the line of fire again, but he shared some interesting perspectives around his family and the different cultures and that are within his family, and some of the struggles that he had seen his loved ones facing, which I thought was really interesting. And then, as I said in the actual issue, South Africa is evolving and changing. And doing this exercise for a second time, some of my answers were different because I'm seeing more representation of other cultures and race groups in terms of marketing and communication and content and products and those sort of things. But there are also certain elements that have shifted for me in terms of my feelings and how things have changed. And it was yeah, quite an introspective thing for me. I hope I covered everything. Justin, do you want to add anything?
That was right on. There was a little less surprise, I think, on my part, and I think that Craig had mentioned that too, being, you know, white males and whatnot. But you know, it's definitely enlightening, and it acted as a good reminder for me personally. I think we kind of fall back into a comfortable space, and it's good to be reminded of these things sometimes. So I was appreciative of that fact.
Definitely. Thanks for sharing. And a lot of like, I think it can also be a lot of things that you can't see, which is can be hard too, because you don't know just how someone grew up or things like that. So awesome. Thanks everyone for sharing. I am going to run through this quickly because I know I want to leave time if anyone has any questions or anything. This slide I'm not going to really dive into. It is outlined on the Being Inclusive Handbook page. The slide I think is more important for you all as managers is this tips for managers on building an inclusive remote culture. So I'm going to run through this one. So the first one is set up time to show up for planned diversity, inclusion, and belonging events. I think this one is so important. Like, I cannot stress how many times I've heard people, individual contributors, say to me, oh my gosh, it was so cool that XYZ was on that training call. Like not in a weird way, but like people are watching managers and like their managers and what they're doing and what they're prioritizing. So if you can, like, do show up for the diversity, inclusion, and belonging events and participate. So not only that you can learn, but you can show your team that it's a priority as well. And second, incorporate diversity, inclusion, and belonging into your team meetings. And a great way to do that is attend the events and then say in your team meeting, I attended this event. These were my key takeaways. Did anyone else attend? What were your takeaways? Just to get the discussion going on your team. Encourage diversity of thought and speaking up. We kind of touched on this before in psychological safety, connecting with your team members, getting to know them on a more personal level, asking team members what pronouns they use, again, getting to know them a little bit more personally, and then being mindful of times that you have meetings set. So not everyone lives in the same time zone as you, which would make things way easier, but also way less diverse. So we just be mindful of those meeting times that you have, and then just be a role model in general. I think that will be really helpful for our teams. So yeah, and these are all on this, well, now I move my mouse and you can't see it, but it's a diversity, inclusion, and belonging tips for managers section. So if you want to reference this, it's in the handbook as well. But, oh, also, Candace is awesome. She's a diversity and inclusion manager here. Her team is growing, so there will be a team soon. But if you have questions, requests, things like that, feel free to open an issue on their issue board. And then also they have an email address that you can email them inquiries as well. So just keep that in mind. But that is what I have for today. We have 2 minutes unless anyone can stay longer if you have questions or comments or anything that you want to share. I'm okay with silence. I can handle it. Cool. Well,
I'm kind of curious what, sorry, the earlier session, I haven't been able to attend the morning session, I guess my morning. But I did notice they have some questions here and there, and I'm curious if it's worth reviewing those once in a while. Maybe it's just the end of the day for us and we're slower.
No, I think we could. I need to pull up the agenda.
Yeah, I don't think they had any questions either, actually, this morning.
Yeah, not at the end.
Well, that may have been just the first week. I recognized that there was an extensive list of questions and we had none.
Oh yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, if you all think of any questions, feel free to use the daily issues or the Slack channel, or you can reach out to any of us or Josh or myself directly, and we're happy to help you. But thank you so much for taking time out of your day to attend this. We really appreciate it.